Molly, you yourself, having studied these things, taught them for many, many years, have not, as I understand it, until recently personally identified with Christian faith. But more recently, that's changed, and you have yourself come to believe in the truth, or that Christianity is true. Can you tell us something about how that happened and what drove it?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the short version. It's a long, complicated story. I grew up in an entirely secular context, not exposed to Christianity in any systematic way. Got to college, university, and began to feel very curious about Christianity, especially Eastern Orthodoxy. I became very interested in Russian history. I pivoted later to the American context, but continually, spent my adult life, I suppose, sidling up alongside Christianity, quite envious of these people who had answers to the big existential questions, who had experiences of community that I had no access to, but I couldn't find my own way into it. I made a couple of failed efforts, to become a Christian, but I couldn't even get over the hump of theism, let alone faith in Jesus. And so I was, if we fast forward to about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I suppose, I was in a place of kind of apathetic agnosticism, subscribed broadly to the philosophy of the great pragmatist William James, in that I liked to think that I was always open to revising my worldview on the basis of new evidence and holding my truth claims lightly, but not really getting anywhere with that. I have been a journalist alongside my academic work for many years. I was working on a magazine article about a local Baptist megachurch and its very successful pastor who had been recently the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And in getting to know him, the short version is that he evangelized me, and he got me onto a reading list focused particularly on the question of Christians' claims about the resurrection, the question of whether or not the resurrection actually happened and is the best explanation for the evidence from the early church that we have. And this was intellectually liberating for me because up to that point, I think I had been paralyzed by all of the all of the ways in which beginning to investigate Christianity would immediately confront me with crazy things, right? I mean, anytime you are approaching really any of the great religions from the outside, you're having to swallow an awful lot. Whether it's all of the miracle claims in the Bible, not just the Jesus stuff, but the idea of heaven and hell, the end times, the predestination and free will. It's just it makes your brain want to explode. Here I finally saw that in the case of Christianity, I could set so many of those intellectual challenges aside because it stands or falls on one question, and that is the resurrection. Was the tomb empty? Did Jesus rise from the dead? If he did, I can get there. I can go with him on who he says he is. And so it was like writing another master's degree or something. I had this intense period of a few months where I was just devouring all sorts of biblical scholarship, also doing reading on cosmology and trying to sort of get myself in a position to accept theism, taking furious notes, really having to constantly confront myself in my note taking with these conclusions I was reluctantly drawing, because as I spent this time reading very kind of serious Christian scholars of the New Testament, particularly N.T. Wright, his books were the big intervention for me. Also, some of the more kind of digestible popular books like Tim Keller's Reason for God. alongside the work of skeptical biblical scholars. So I was really trying to, pit these different schools of thought against each other. I was coming to the conclusion that if, and this is crucial, if I was willing to let go of my anti-supernaturalist bias, if I was willing to suspend my disbelief in an interventionist God who could actually, interfere with our lives, and that was a huge hurdle, then I was reluctantly getting to the point where the Christian account of the resurrection was an awful lot more plausible and an awful lot more satisfying in the context of the evidence we have than I ever expected it to be. So I didn't have, and all this time I was praying, going to church, going to this mega church. I never thought that I would be a mega church type. I always thought I would, end up a respectable Anglican or Catholic or something like that. But the stripped down presentation of the gospel that you get in a Reformed Baptist megachurch was, I think, just what I needed. And I, was working with this pastor, and he recruited a couple of other people to kind of talk me through these things. I never had any spiritual experience. I wanted, would have been lovely if, Jesus had just appeared at the foot of my bed and clarified everything. That didn't happen. What happened is that in just trying to be consistent with my own pragmatist philosophy, where, I want to be willing to assimilate new evidence and change my worldview accordingly, I got to the point where I had to admit I was well north of 51% persuaded of the resurrection. And maybe the rest of the conviction and feeling of assurance I wanted, it comes with the experience of faith. It was not something that was reasonable to expect before taking that plunge. So I found myself in the unexpected position of, being on stage at this big mega church while the worship band was playing, getting baptized in the chlorinated, jacuzzi-sized tank. And here I am still trying to figure out, what it means now to be a kind of participant observer.